That colossal stone head, half-carved, left in a forest. The people who started it, they're gone. These places, these abandoned monuments, they're the best teachers we have. You start to see ancient engineering differently. It wasn't magic, it was human effort, tangible, and often precarious. There's an obelisk, cracked. It was meant to be the largest one ever raised. We can stand in its shadow, and there's a pyramid. It collapsed under its own ambition. So why would a civilization do that? Leave a giant Buddha trapped in a cliff? Or a king's tomb, forever without a roof? Each site, frozen like that, holds secrets, and modern archaeology is just starting to decode them. That drive to build the impossible. What does it reveal about us? You can go to the quarry at Aswan, put your hand on the granite. It's the same stone the workers touched, a single slab of pink granite, still attached to the bedrock. A trench carved all around it by hand. That's the unfinished obelisk. If they'd finished it, it would have been over 140 feet tall, weighing more than 1,000 tons. It was supposed to be a statement of absolute power, a stone needle for the sky to honor a pharaoh, but it became something else, a textbook left open on the desert floor. The story of its failure is in the cracks, a hidden flaw in the stone, a weakness that spiderwebbed through the monolith while they worked. That single fracture, they probably found it only after years of labor. It made the whole project useless, so they walked away. They left their stone hammers scattered around the site, like toys a giant child abandoned. This frozen moment is a gift. We can see every step. They used round balls of dolerite, a stone harder than granite, to pound channels into the bedrock, swinging these pounders for hours. For days, for years, pulverizing the granite into dust to make a deep trench around the block. You can still see the marks, the rhythmic indentations. Like a fossilized heartbeat, they likely used water to swell wooden wedges. They may have lit controlled fires to heat the stone, then doused it with water to make it crack along certain lines. It was a battle of patience against an unyielding mountain. The logistics are staggering. Historians think it would have taken hundreds of workers, maybe for decades. Just to free this one block, then came the journey. Once extracted, it would have been dragged to the Nile, loaded onto a special barge, floated down river. A journey full of peril. We know this because other obelisks made it. The Lateran obelisk in Rome. It was quarried, moved, raised, but here in Aswan, the gamble failed. The crack meant all that investment, all that human energy. It was for nothing. What does a public failure mean for a ruler with divine power? The economic cost was immense. But the symbolic cost, a monument to the gods broken in the earth that must have been profound. It's a humbling reminder. For all their skill, the ancient builders were always one hidden flaw away from disaster. This first frozen endeavor shows us their greatest achievements were never guaranteed. They were always a precarious balance between ambition and the unforgiving nature of the stone. That abandoned quarry is quiet. It's a humbling place, but if you go a few hundred miles up the Nile, there's another story. A story about ambition left in the landscape. On the west bank of Thebes, you have the two colossi of Memnon. They're famous. Tourists come at dawn to see them, but most people don't walk back into the hills behind them. Not far, and there, in the same quarry that gave them their stone, there's a third giant, just waiting. It was supposed to stand with the other two, a monumental trio, guarding the mortuary temple of Amenhotep III. But this one never left. It never saw the sun. It's lying on its back, fused to the living rock of the cliff, a spectral outline of a pharaoh. You can stand where its face would be and look up at the quarry wall above you. The scale is disorienting. They weren't just extracting a block here. They were carving the statue in place, directly into the mountain. That method has a name: block and trench quarrying. The sculptors started by cutting a deep, wide trench all around the shape of the Colossus. They worked from the top down, like they were peeling a giant out of the stone. And before the statue was ever separated, they started giving it form. You can still see the measuring grids painted on the surface, red ochre lines forming squares. A guide for proportion. They would have transferred a master cartoon onto that gigantic scale. The first stage used heavy point chisels, struck with wooden mallets to knock away huge chunks. To find the rough silhouette, then finer chisels define the planes of the body, the curve of the crown. Finally, abrasive sand ground with water would have polished the surface smooth. But here the work stopped somewhere in the middle phases. The rough shape of the headdress is clear. The suggestion of arms crossed over the chest, holding the royal crook and flail. But the details are ghosts. The feet are barely suggested at all. This sequence tells you everything. They carved from the head downward because it was safer. The delicate work on the face, the regalia that was done while the figure was still solidly supported by the bedrock. Only when the sculpting was nearly complete would they have undercut it. Inserting wooden beams and slowly, carefully, separating their creation for the journey to the temple. The abandonment is a sudden snapshot. Amenhotep III ruled for nearly 4 decades. A time of immense prosperity, artistic flourishing. His reign was one of the most stable in Egypt's history, so why leave a king half-formed? Egyptologists point to a shift in focus. Late in his reign, the pharaoh's attention and resources may have turned to his grand mortuary temple complex, a city for the afterlife that required staggering labor. Or maybe the political winds were shifting, court factions vying for influence and patronage, the death of a key official, the rise of a new favorite architect. Any of these could redirect a royal workforce overnight. Think of the master sculptor who oversaw this. For years, he directed a team of 100 or more artisans. They woke each day to the rhythm of hammer on stone, slowly coaxing a god-king from the cliff. Then, one day, the orders changed. The royal inspectors stopped coming. The supply of copper for chisels dried up. The team was reassigned. What happened to that artist, his life's work? This 70-foot testament to his skill became a permanent public fragment. This site makes the vulnerability of ancient art painfully clear. Even the most grandiose expressions of royal power depended on a constant flow of will, wealth, and stability. When that flow was interrupted, the art stopped. The giant in the quarry is more than an unfinished statue. It's a fossilized moment of transition, where grand plans met the unpredictable current of history. Egypt's ambition wasn't the only ancient force testing stone. For a different kind of scale, you go north to a plateau in the Bekaa Valley. The Temple of Jupiter at Baalbek is staggering. Its 6 remaining columns rise like petrified giants. That's the postcard image, but to understand the audacity here, you turn your back on the temple. You look instead at the nearby quarry. There, in a trench of its own making, rests a block called the Stone of the Pregnant Woman. The name is from local legend, but the reality is more profound. It's a single piece of limestone, roughly cut, waiting, and it's not even the largest one there. Another block, partially hidden, is estimated to weigh over 1,000 tons. To put that in perspective, that's heavier than 3 fully loaded Boeing 747 jets. It's a mass that defies modern comprehension. The question isn't just why it was cut, but how anyone believed they could move it. The temple itself gives a clue. You look at the western retaining wall. Built into it are 3 other colossal blocks known as the Trilithon. Each one weighs around 800 tons. They were quarried, transported, and lifted over 60 feet into the air, so the feat was possible. The process in the quarry was precision and patience. Workers first cleared the overburden, the soil and weaker stone above the good limestone. Then, using metal tools harder than the stone, they carved a deep trench, maybe 6 feet wide, completely around the intended block. They worked from the top down, like in Egypt, but the scale was more immense. As the trench deepened, they left temporary pillars of bedrock to support the block until they were ready. Tool marks suggest a combination of techniques: heavy iron picks and chisels to define the shape. Then, likely, they drove metal or wooden wedges into carefully drilled channels along the bottom. By wetting the wedges, the wood would expand with tremendous force, creating a clean fracture along a plane, separating the monolith from the living earth. The quarry floor itself is a prepared surface, smoothed for the next phase, transport. Archaeologists have debated for over a century who did this work. The Romans built the temple we see, but these foundational megaliths and the even larger ones left in the quarry may belong to a much earlier phase. Some experts point to tool marks and construction styles that suggest a Bronze Age origin over 1,000 years before Rome. This idea transforms the site. It means an earlier, unknown civilization had the engineering confidence to work on this titanic scale. They prepared a foundation worthy of gods, and millennia later, the Romans simply built on it. Moving an 800-ton block even a single mile is a logistical nightmare. The prevailing theory involves wooden sledges, rollers from giant tree trunks, and an immense earthen ramp that grew as the block advanced. Hundreds, maybe thousands of workers hauled on ropes of woven hemp, coordinated by drum beats or chants. Levers were used for minute adjustments. Every movement was incremental, a battle against friction and gravity. The abandoned blocks in the quarry ask a more haunting question. What level of social organization, what absolute faith in engineering, does it take to even begin cutting a stone that large? You don't commit generations of labor to a 1,000-ton block on a whim. It implies a society with extraordinary resources, hierarchical control, and a shared vision so powerful it could motivate such a staggering investment of human energy. The Baalbek megaliths, both moved and unmoved, show the outer edge of ancient ambition. They are a testament to a forgotten phase of engineering where the goal wasn't just to build big, but to challenge the very concept of what was physically possible. They left a foundation of such overwhelming scale that later empires could only marvel at it and build upon its shoulders. The ambition at Baalbek was titanic. It was a contest with the mountain, but sometimes the interruption isn't in the stone, it's in the life of the king who ordered it. So you go to Egypt. To the sands of Abusia, there's a neat line of pyramids there rising from the desert. Their smooth limestone casings catch the sun. They're orderly. They're complete, and then, sitting among them, is a different shape. A low, ragged mound of dark rubble, rough-cut core stones. It looks less like a monument, more like a geological accident. That's the tomb of Pharaoh Neferefre. It's a pyramid that never was. The site feels abrupt. It's like the horn sounded to end the workday, and the workers just never came back. Blocks are scattered. Foundations for the mortuary temple stop in mid-course. There's no smooth white casing, no soaring apex pointing to the heavens. Just this exposed skeletal core. For archaeologists, this chaotic mound is a gift. Its clarity. It captures the frantic initial phase of pyramid building. Frozen at the moment the king's life ended, Neferefre was a ruler of the 5th dynasty, a time of shifting power, shortening reigns. The evidence suggests his rule was brief. Maybe 2 years, maybe 3. His unexpected passing created a crisis. The pyramid, his vehicle to eternity, was barely begun. Papyrus records from the period, administrative documents found at the site, they describe the scramble that followed. The state workshops redirected all effort. The priority was no longer the majestic outer form. It was the sacred interior, the burial chamber, the descending corridor that would carry the king's spirit. They had to create a functional resting place, and fast. What we see today is that triage in stone. The builders first laid out a square base. they began piling up a core of rough, local limestone blocks bound with clay mortar. This was the mass that would eventually be shaped and sheathed, but the work only got so far. You can see the uneven layers, the haste in the masonry. Nearby, the foundations for the mortuary temple, the place for eternal offerings, are just a shallow outline in the sand, and most telling is the complete absence of the fine, white Tura limestone casing. That gleaming skin was always the final act, applied after the bulky core was stable. Here, it was never even ordered. Some Egyptologists studying the base see evidence of a changed plan. The earliest construction phase suggests a rectangular mastaba tomb, a simpler structure. Then, perhaps as the young king sought to assert his legacy, the plan was upgraded. To a true pyramid, the masonry shows this shift, a change of heart etched into the earth. You look from this ragged hillock to the neighboring pyramid of Sahure with its clean, geometric slopes. That's what Neferefre's monument was meant to become. The contrast is a lesson in scale and intention. This site forces a question about ancient belief. The pyramid was more than a tomb. It was a machine for resurrection, a ramp for the king's soul to ascend and join the sun god. An unfinished pyramid was a broken machine. Did the priests and architects fear this compromised the journey? The frantic completion of the burial chamber suggests they believed a functional, sealed crypt was the minimum. The absolute requirement for his afterlife. The majestic exterior, while vital for glory, was secondary to the ritual necessity below ground. The mound at Abusia is a monument to human mortality. It shows that even the most rigid, state-controlled building project was vulnerable to the simple fact of a life ending. The workers downed tools, the architects rolled up their papyrus plans, and the desert winds began their long work on the unshaped stones. In its unfinished state, Neferefre's pyramid reveals more about the pressures and priorities of a society facing royal loss than any finished monument ever could. The desert sands hold a king's story, a story about time running out. But there's another kind of ambition, one carved from faith that was also stopped. Not by a single life, but by forces much larger. If you go east to Sichuan in China, you find these lush green cliffs. They overlook a place where 3 rivers meet. And there you see the giant Buddha of Leshan. It's serene, 230 feet tall from the Tang dynasty. Millions come to see it, but not far from it, hidden in the same sandstone cliff, there's something else. The Quarry of the unfinished Buddha. It's a quiet place, almost secret. You feel the scale before you really understand it. You're not looking at a statue. You're looking at a vast, smooth recess carved into the cliff. A colossal negative space, and inside it, the faint outline of a seated figure emerges from the rock. Just a suggestion of a head, shoulders, crossed legs. Art historians have measured it. They say if it had been finished, this figure would have been even bigger than its famous neighbor. Possibly the largest seated Buddha in the world. This isn't a damaged monument. It's a project that barely started. A single breath of intention held in the stone. That outline itself is a masterclass in planning. Before any detail work began, the monastic engineers and master sculptors had to solve the cliff. They built an immense bamboo scaffolding network, a temporary city clinging to the rock just to give workers access. Then, with plumb lines and geometric templates, they sketched the entire figure right onto the stone. This was the cartoon, the divine blueprint. The first physical act was the roughing out. Teams of workers with heavy, pointed chisels would have started knocking away the cliff around that outline. They created this giant recess, this bowl in the mountain, to isolate the figure. They worked from the top down, removing tons of rock above them so they wouldn't undermine their own work. The tool marks here are broad, aggressive. They speak of the brute force needed just to begin the conversation with the mountain. Only after this shell was formed would the finer work start. For that, the tools would change. Lighter chisels with finer edges, gouges and abrasives to model the gentle curves of the face, the intricate folds of the robes, the serene expression. You can see this two-stage process perfected on the finished Leshan Buddha nearby. That statue isn't just a carving, it's an engineered structure. Hidden in its coiled hair are discrete drainage channels to divert rainwater. Its posture, the shaping of the rock behind it, all calculated to distribute weight and prevent erosion. The unfinished Colossus would have needed the same brilliant, hidden infrastructure. A statue that large is architecture, so why is it only an outline? The Tang dynasty was a golden age for Buddhism, supported by imperial patronage, but these projects lived and died by that support. Historical records point to a period of regional instability, maybe even conflict, that could have severed the flow of funds and diverted labor, or it might have been a simple shift in religious focus. A new abbot, a new school of thought, a new favored site. The monastic community that launched this titanic endeavor may have faced a pragmatic choice: to pour all their resources into maintaining and protecting the Buddha they had already finished, instead of gambling on a second one. Standing before that smooth hollow in the cliff, you feel the weight of that decision. The scale of the faith that conceived it is humbling. It was a declaration that the divine could be invited into the very landscape. But the unfinished outline is an equally powerful statement about the limits of human resources. It shows that even the most profound spiritual vision depends on a fragile chain. A chain of peace, prosperity, sustained collective will. This silent cliff face doesn't speak of failure. It speaks of an ambition so vast it acknowledged its own boundaries. It's a lesson in monumental coordination, where art and engineering and belief met a moment in history that simply couldn't carry them all forward. There's this silent cliff in China, a faith interrupted, but sometimes a monument is left behind not because faith died. It's because the empire itself was still figuring out what it was. On a windswept plain in Iran, Pasargadae, there's a small stone house, gabled roof, stark, elegant, almost humble. That's the tomb of Cyrus the Great. He built the Persian Empire, conquered from the Aegean to the Indus, and he's buried in this simple structure. The contrast is sharp, and it gets stranger. Walk a little way from that tomb. On a low rise, there's a stone platform, and on it, just a few layers of limestone blocks, perfectly cut. This is the start of a second tomb. Much grander, never finished, the story is legacy in conflict. Cyrus's known tomb, with its 6 steps and pitched roof, feels older, more personal, solitary. This new structure, barely begun, was meant to be larger, more imposing, maybe with columns, a different roof. It speaks a new imperial language, a statement for the ages. Who was it for? Archaeologists debate. Maybe for Cyrus himself, a successor wanting more grandeur for him. Maybe for a family member. Maybe for his son, Cambyses II. The truth is lost, but the construction site isn't. This platform is a classroom for early Achaemenid engineering. The Persian Empire was new, a fusion of cultures. You see that fusion in the stones. The platform, a leveled foundation. That technique is Mesopotamian. But the stonework is different. The blocks are laid in precise horizontal courses. And between them, no mortar, none. The fit is so exact the joints are nearly invisible. That's a hallmark of later Persian perfection at Persepolis. Here at Pasargadae, it's the first attempt, unfinished. To do this, the masons used tools from Anatolia and Ionia. Look close at the stone and you'd see the evidence. Fine parallel lines, marks from toothed metal saws that sliced the limestone. Small circular depressions from tubular drills, probably used with abrasive sand. This wasn't rough work, this was the start of high precision. They were building a stone puzzle held together by geometry and weight alone. The few completed courses show they'd mastered it. They were ready to build upward, then they stopped. The history points to the years after Cyrus's death. his son Cambyses launched a difficult campaign into Egypt. There was unrest at home. The empire was vast and still new. Resources and attention went to securing power, not finishing a symbolic monument. The priority was survival, not stone. You can see what this tomb might have become by looking ahead a generation. At Naksh-e-Rustam, the tomb of Darius I, Cyrus's successor, is carved into a cliff face. Monumental, covered in reliefs proclaiming his right to rule and his devotion to Ahura Mazda. It's the full, confident expression of Persian imperial identity. This abandoned platform at Pasargadae is the missing link, the moment between the simple gabled house and the colossal rock-cut facade, the empire experimenting, trying on a grander architectural language for its kings. So what does it mean to leave a king's memorial half-built? Here, it speaks less of disrespect and more of a historical pivot. The workers downed their saws and drills because the world was changing too fast. The empire was moving, literally and symbolically. The capital shifted. Styles evolved. The urgent demands of the present overwrote the plans for commemorating the past. This lonely platform isn't a failure. It's a snapshot of an empire deciding what it wanted to be. And by walking away from this stone puzzle, they left us a clearer picture of their beginnings than any finished monument ever could. The Persian plateau had this stone platform. Just sitting there, but for a different kind of stonework, you have to go to the other side of the world. To the Andes, high above Cusco, there's the fortress Sacsayhuaman. With its famous zigzag walls, stones so large, fitted so tightly you can't slip paper between them. It's the finished thing, a masterpiece, but to see how it was done, you don't look at the fortress. You turn away from it, you go to the quarries, Rumicolca, and there it's organized chaos. That's the real story. Dozens of huge granite blocks are scattered across the hillside. Some as big as small houses, and they're not raw. They've been worked. You can see the tool marks, the clean planes where they were split, but they were never moved. It's a workshop frozen in time, and in this workshop you see the Inca philosophy. They didn't force a stone into a shape. It was a conversation. They'd find a stone, study its grain, its natural lines, and ask what form was waiting inside. The goal was to fit the stone, not conquer it. The process started with watching. A master mason would examine a granite outcrop, looking for its weaknesses. Then, using only hammerstones, other, harder rocks teams would begin to pound, not randomly. They'd pound along a chosen line, creating a channel of stone dust. It was incredibly slow. It needed patience, a deep, rhythmic consistency. The pounding would deepen the channel until the stone, following its own logic, split along the plane. It was persuasion, not force, but the blocks here show more than splitting. Look close and you see deliberate bumps left on the sides. They're called bosses. Knobs, they weren't mistakes, they were handles. Ropes would be tied around them, so hundreds of workers could haul the multi-ton block, inch by inch, down from the quarry. Once at the building site, these knobs would be pounded off, leaving the smooth surface you see in the walls. The most telling evidence here is the trial fitting. Archaeologists have found blocks in the quarry with distinct stepped cuts, unique angled faces, and at the fortress wall, they've found the exact negative space waiting for that shape. It's like finding a single puzzle piece miles from the box. That proves the method. Stones got a rough, preliminary shape at the quarry, then they were dragged to the site. Only there, in final position, would the final fitting happen. Masons would slowly abrade the edges of two blocks with sand and water, rocking them together, grinding them down until the fit was perfect. The quarry was for the rough cut, the wall was for the final marriage of stone to stone, and you can see the failures. A block where a split went wrong, veered off and ruined the piece. That block was abandoned instantly. It was a lesson in listening. If the stone said no, the masons moved on. The scale of labor is hard to grasp. Moving just one block required a communal effort, a synchronized pull, shared purpose. So why did they stop? Why are so many ready stones still lying here? The timing points to the Spanish conquest, the 1530s. The arrival of Pizarro didn't just bring conflict, it shattered a world. It broke the entire social and economic system that mobilized this labor. The workers who knew this stone language were dispersed, or their lives were redirected. The complex logistics of food, organization, belief that sustained the project, it evaporated. Rumicolca is an open textbook. The pages are granite. The lessons are in the half-made shapes and the abandoned knobs. It shows that Inca masonry, for all its magic, was a system. A brilliant, labor-intensive system of observation, patience, and communal effort. It was an art of fitting, not fighting, and in its unfinished state, it shows the vulnerable human network behind the immortal walls. The conquest didn't just topple an empire, it interrupted a conversation with the mountain mid-sentence. That conversation with the mountain was interrupted. But sometimes a project is so large, its ambition so deep, that it outlives the world that started it. In western Turkey, near the coast, you have the ruins of the Temple of Apollo at Didyma. It's a paradox, a forest of stone that feels huge and unfinished. You walk through a gateway into a sunlit courtyard, and around you are dozens of enormous column drums. Stacked 2 or 3 high, but they're smooth. They were never carved with the vertical grooves a classical column should have. They look like giant stone cans just waiting. Scattered everywhere are massive bases, some with intricate patterns half-finished, others still just rough blocks. This was meant to be one of the largest temples the Greeks ever imagined. And for over 600 years, through different empires, they kept working on it. It was never fully roofed, never truly finished. It became a permanent work in progress. A house for a god, always under construction. The scale is the first shock. Just the foundation platform is a feat. It's larger than a football field. To make that level base required moving thousands of tons of earth. Then came the stone. They used a local marble quarried miles away. Each column drum, the cylindrical sections, could weigh over 40 tons. And there were supposed to be 120 columns. Moving these drums required a system. Archaeologists found evidence of a permanent construction ramp made of packed earth and stone. A sloping highway built just to drag these monoliths up. You can almost hear the wooden sledges, the ox drivers, the ropes straining. Once on the platform, the real coordination started. Each drum was rolled into position. Then, using wooden cranes powered by treadmills or winches, they were lifted. The drums were stacked with precision. But the unfinished state shows a secret. Look at many of these drums. You'll see rough stone knobs on their sides, lifting bosses, handholds for the crane ropes. In a finished temple, these would be chiseled off. Here they remain, frozen in the act of being lifted. It's as if the workers just stepped away. The planning was meticulous. Masons' marks and numbering systems are carved into many blocks. Greek letters and symbols, an assembly manual. This block connects to that one. This drum is the third from the bottom. A giant 3-dimensional puzzle organized with care. That level of planning suggests a central architect, master drawings, coordinating teams that might not even speak the same language. The most telling details are in the carving. The design was extravagantly ornate. The column bases were meant to be covered in intricate reliefs. On many, you can see the process. A master sculptor would sketch the design in red paint on the marble. Then, apprentices would use fine chisels to carve a shallow guideline along the paint. Finally, the deep cutting would begin. On countless bases at Didyma, you see only the painted sketch, now a ghost, or the guidelines barely etched. The decoration never emerged. One column shows the sequence perfectly. Its drums are stacked. Partway up, the vertical fluting has been started. Fluting, those elegant grooves, was always done after the column was up. The final dressing. Here, a mason began carving from the top down. The first few feet are deeply cut, crisp. Then the work becomes shallower, more hesitant. Then it stops. The rest of the column is smooth, a snapshot of a task abandoned, maybe when the lunch horn blew or when the foreman said the funds had run out again. And that's the core of Didyma's story: intermittent funding. The temple was funded by the wealthy city of Miletus nearby, by donations from rulers and pilgrims. Its construction spanned the Hellenistic period and continued under Roman rule, but political control changed. Wars diverted money, patrons died. The project would surge forward for a decade, then stall for a generation. Work became sporadic. A team of carvers might arrive, finish one section, and then not be replaced when they left. The temple became a cyclical project, a symbol of enduring faith that was also a permanent drain. This raises a question. What was it like to worship here, to conduct rites in a space that echoed with construction sounds, where the house of the god was visibly, audibly unfinished? For the ancient Greeks, the act of building could itself be a form of devotion. The perpetual work may have been a demonstration of ongoing commitment, a promise to the god that they would never stop trying to create a worthy home. The very incompleteness could have held its own power, a testament to a faith too vast to ever be fully contained by stone. Didyma is not a ruin in the usual sense. It's a suspended moment, a lesson in ambition, logistics, and the fragile economics of the sacred. It shows that the greatest ancient buildings weren't just erected. They were sustained, and when that sustaining force flickered, the stone simply paused, holding its breath for centuries. The dust at Didyma is marble dust. Fine and white, but there's another kind of ambition. You find it in a landscape of earth. In the plains of Iraq near Baghdad, a shape rises from the flat land. A mountain of mud, the Ziggurat of Dur-Kurigalzu. From a distance, it looks like a natural hill, weathered and soft, but when you climb it, your feet scuff against something else. Not dirt, millions of hand-made bricks. This is a stepped pyramid for the Kassite god Enlil, and it's caught in the act of being born. Its core is exposed. The final skin, the beautiful facing, was never put on. What you're walking on is the skeleton. Erosion has stripped the outer layers away. It reveals the internal brickwork in cross-section. Like an anatomy lesson, you can see the different bricks laid in distinct patterns. The core is sun-dried mud brick, cheap, quick to produce. That was the structural mass. But the design called for a protective facing. Fired bricks kiln-baked to withstand the rains, and bitumen, a natural tar, as waterproof mortar between them. On this ziggurat, that fired brick armor was only partly applied. In patches, you see where it begins, then just stops. The summit, where a temple to Enlil should have been, is a flat, empty platform. The staircases for the priests end in mid-air. They lead to nothing. The construction details show organized labor. The bricks are standardized, a consistent size. That means central workshops were producing them by the millions. The bricklaying patterns aren't random. They're laid in alternating courses, headers and stretchers to bind the structure. To distribute weight, archaeologists have traced the internal drainage systems, channels of brick and bitumen, to channel water away from the vulnerable mud brick core. This was architecture thinking centuries ahead, built from the humblest materials. To understand what was lost, you look south to the great ziggurat of Ur. That structure, though eroded, shows the intended finish, a smooth, sloping facade of baked brick, monumental staircases converging on a summit shrine. A bridge between earth and heaven. At Dur-Kurigalzu, that bridge was never completed. The spiritual consequence for the city would have been profound. In Mesopotamian belief, the ziggurat was the axis mundi, the center of the world where the divine descended to meet humanity. An unfinished ziggurat was a severed connection, a promise to the gods left unfulfilled. So why was it abandoned? The Kassite dynasty ruled Babylon for over 400 years, a period of stability. Dur-Kurigalzu was a royal city, a statement of their power, but near the end of the 12th century BCE, their world collapsed. Ancient records and modern archaeology point to a catastrophic invasion from the east. By the Kingdom of Elam, this wasn't a minor raid, it was an empire-ending event. The Elamites sacked Babylon itself. They carried off treasured cultural icons. In that moment of collapse, the workers at the Ziggurat site would have dropped their bricks, their bitumen buckets. The kilns went cold. The complex logistics of feeding and housing a massive workforce vanished overnight. The project wasn't paused, it was erased by history. This mountain of mud brick does something a polished stone monument can't. It strips away the myth. It reveals the colossal, brick-by-brick reality of Mesopotamian ambition. It shows their grandeur was built not from rare stone, but from the earth beneath their feet. Shaped by countless hands, its unfinished state is a direct imprint of catastrophe. We're not looking at a ruin that fell slowly. We're looking at a construction site that was suddenly and permanently vacated. The wind has been smoothing its edges for over 3,000 years, but it has never managed to hide the fact this mountain was left half-made. That mountain of mud brick came from an empire that collapsed all at once. But there's another kind of mystery, one that starts in quiet. You go to the Gulf Coast of Mexico, the lowlands. The air is thick, the jungle is a solid green wall. And in the Tuxtlas Mountains, you find the source, not mud, something harder, volcanic plugs of basalt, dark stone, dense. This is where the Olmecs came. Over 3,000 years ago, they came for the stone to make their colossal heads. The finished heads at La Venta, their icons, those stern faces with helmets. But the real story starts here in the quarries, where some of those heads never left. The scene is completely still. In jungle clearings, giant stone spheres and rough blocks are half buried in the earth. Like the workers just stopped for the day and the forest grew over their tools, some blocks are unmistakable. They have the rounded shape of a head, but the features are only ghosts. A hint of a brow, the curve of a cheek. Their monuments paused right at the beginning. These abandoned forms, they force a question. They make you rethink the assumption. Each finished head weighs many tons. The quarries are in the mountains. The ceremonial centers are dozens of miles away, across swamps and rivers. The Olmecs had no animals to pull. No wheel, so how the quarries give the first clues. Archaeologists looking at the basalt outcrops see a method. The Olmecs didn't just hack at the mountain. They targeted columnar basalt, a natural formation where lava cools into long, pillar-like blocks. They'd find a suitable column. Then, using hammerstones of even harder rock, they'd pound a groove around its base. A relentless pecking rhythm. Over days, the groove would deepen until the column cracked free from the volcanic plug, but they didn't carve the face here. Not yet. You look at the abandoned blocks. They show the first stage was about creating a portable form. With those same hammerstones, workers would knock off the sharp edges. They'd rough out a general oval shape, a sphere, something that could be rolled or at least moved without snagging. This roughing out reduced weight. It made the next phase possible. The tool marks tell a story. The surface of these proto-heads is dimpled, a texture like stone acne. That's the signature of the pecking technique. Each dimple is from the impact of a hammerstone. It was a process of reduction, crushing the basalt grain by grain. It was slow, incredibly laborious. On some blocks you find another feature. Carefully carved holes or levering slots cut into the sides. These were likely points where wooden levers could be inserted. To rock the block, to adjust its position, or to help lift it onto a transport system. That transport is the great puzzle. The main theory, looking at the geography, involves both land and water. The imagined journey is a feat of communal logistics. First, the rough sphere would be moved from the quarry. Using log rollers and ropes made from local fibers, teams of maybe hundreds would haul it down mountain paths. Every slope was a crisis, every ravine a project. The goal was a river. Once at the water, the stone could be lashed to a raft made of balsa wood. Floating it downstream to the Gulf Coast lowlands would have been the easiest part. From there, a final overland pull to the ceremonial center at La Venta or San Lorenzo. Only then, at its final resting place, would the sculpture become a portrait. Master artists would take over. Using finer tools, maybe of jade or obsidian, they'd peck out the specific features: the broad nose, the thick lips, the distinctive helmet. This sequence matters. It means the expression, the individuality of each head, was the very last thing added. The personality was given to the stone only after its long journey. So why leave one here, in the quarry, forever anonymous? Was it a ritual abandonment, an offering to the mountain spirit for the stone taken, or was it a mistake? A hidden flaw in the basalt that cracked during rough shaping, making it useless? Or maybe it signals a shift in power, a change in leadership at the distant center that made this particular portrait politically dangerous before it was even born. These silent clearings in the Tuxtlas, they're more than workshops. They're the first chapter. In them, you see the start of a tradition that would echo for millennia across Mesoamerica. The Olmecs were figuring it out: how to talk to a volcano, how to make a mountain walk. Each abandoned sphere is a lesson in ambition, in logistics, and in the very human possibility that sometimes the journey itself was enough. The portrait could wait forever in the quiet of the green jungle. The jungle keeps its secrets. It leaves only silent stones, but other civilizations, they left their plans out in the open. In the stone they cut, in Spain, the aqueduct at Segovia stands perfect, 2 tiers of arches marching across the city. It's a symbol of Roman order. A finished machine for water, and then, just a few miles away, in the quarry at Baracale, that order is frozen, but in a different way. The ground is covered with finished granite blocks. Each one cut to a precise size, edges are smooth, faces are dressed. They're identical to the stones in the aqueduct, but they never made the journey. This isn't a site of failure, it's a site of surplus, a stockpile of perfection just left behind. The question isn't how they built it, we can see that. The question is why they stopped building when the pieces were still ready. These blocks are a direct window into the Roman industrial mind. They didn't quarry stone only when they needed it. They operated a system of prefabrication. Teams worked in the quarry, producing standardized components in advance. Think of it like a factory assembly line. But for a 2,000-year-old infrastructure project, the blocks at Baracale aren't random rubble. They're specific shapes: voussoirs, the wedge-shaped stones for the arches, and ashlars, the rectangular blocks for the piers, each one cut to a template, a master pattern, so every piece would fit seamlessly with the next, miles away at the site. The evidence is in the stone itself. Look at the edges of these blocks. You see a technique called anathyrosis. The Romans would only polish a narrow band around the perimeter of the stone's face. The center of the face was left slightly rough, recessed. Why? Because when 2 blocks were placed together, only the smooth outer bands would make contact. That created a perfect, tight seal with minimal effort. It was a brilliant shortcut for mass production. It guaranteed quality without requiring every single surface to be flawless. And on many blocks you can still see the lifting bosses, those rough stone knobs left on specifically for the ropes of the crane. They were the handles. Proof these blocks were always meant to be moved. The quarry itself is a lesson in logistics. You can trace the roads leading out, engineered for heavy transport. You can see the tool marks from metal saws likely operated with water and abrasive sand to slice the granite, and the precise chisel work for finishing. This was a permanent industrial facility, supplying not just the aqueduct but likely other projects across the province. So what happened? Why leave a fortune in perfectly cut stone sitting in a field? Roman engineering was as much about project management as it was about arches. Historians and engineers looking at the site see a few possibilities. The first is a cancelled extension. The aqueduct we see delivered water to the city's upper area. Maybe there was a plan for a new branch to serve a growing district or a new bath complex. The blocks were quarried and shaped in anticipation. Then the plan changed, funding was redirected. A new provincial governor arrived with different priorities. The second possibility is more pragmatic, strategic reserve. The Romans knew that maintaining an aqueduct was a perpetual task. Earthquakes, settling, weathering arches needed repair. Having a cache of perfectly matched replacement stones right at the source quarry was a form of long-term insurance. It meant any repair crew could arrive and have the exact parts they needed. Without having to restart the whole quarrying process, it was planning for centuries ahead. Follow a single wedge-shaped block through its intended life. Cut from the bedrock, shaped by a mason who knew its exact place in an arch that existed only on a papyrus plan, loaded onto a cart dragged along the Roman road. At the worksite, a crane lifts it, the ropes biting into those temporary bosses. A worker high on the wooden centering framework guides it into place. It slots between its neighbors, the smooth anatherosis bands kiss. The boss is chiseled off, the arch is locked, but for the blocks at Baracale, that final journey never came. The crane never arrived. This raises a question, an economic one. Granite blocks of that quality represented immense value, labor, skill, transport capacity, all invested. To leave them was to write off a significant capital investment. For the Roman overseer, that calculation must have been coldly logical. The cost of moving and storing the surplus blocks now outweighed their future potential value. It was cheaper to abandon them than to pay for their upkeep or transport. The very efficiency of their system could lead to waste. The silent quarry at Baracale does something. It demystifies Roman engineering. We see it not as magic, but as a meticulous, scalable business. A system of anticipation and precision that could, in its flawless execution, sometimes overproduce. Those blocks are not ruins, they are inventory, a testament to an empire that planned so thoroughly, it left its spare parts behind, waiting for a project that the future never requested. From the industrial logic of a Roman quarry, you go to a place where faith carved its home right out of a mountain. Ellora in India, 34 cave temples along a basalt cliff. Most of them are breathtakingly complete, but one, Cave 29, the Duma Lina, exists in a state of profound suspension. You step from bright sun into a cavern. A colossal, shadowy space. The scale is immediate, humbling, but the details are ghosts. The floor is rough, uneven. All around you, pillars rise from the stone, but they're only partially realized. Some are smooth cylinders, others are rough-hewn squares, still fused to the walls. The ceiling soars overhead, a vast dome of untouched rock, and on the walls you see them. Faint lines, red ochre grids and geometric outlines painted right onto the basalt. This isn't a ruined temple, it's a temple's blueprint etched in stone and shadow. The entire cavern is a single, fossilized moment of conception. The process here was subtractive. Unlike building up, the architects at Ellora worked from the top down, carving a mountain into a hollow form. For Cave 29, you can follow their intended sequence perfectly because they stopped in the middle of it. First, teams of excavators would have cut a massive, arched opening into the cliff face. Then, with iron chisels and hammers, they began the gross excavation. They removed thousands of tons of rock to create this huge, open cavern. Only after defining the volume of the space did the architectural detailing begin. Masons would have marked the positions of pillars, shrines, walkways with those painted lines. Then sculptors started to work inward from the walls, carving the pillars and architectural niches out of the living rock. This method was critical for stability and precision. You carve the delicate roof and upper features first, while the stone below still supports the workers. The final, most sacred stage was always the iconographic sculpture, the statues of deities, the intricate narrative reliefs that would make the cave a living text of faith. In Cave 29, that stage never arrived. The walls remained smooth where gods were meant to emerge. Those painted guidelines are a direct message from the planners. Art historians studying them see a highly organized system. The grids ensured proportional accuracy for translating small-scale models onto the monumental cliff face. Measurements are marked in ancient scripts. You can stand where a master sculptor stood, looking at a red outline of a lotus medallion or a divine figure, and see exactly what the next 1,000 hours of labor were supposed to achieve. The abrupt halt preserved this planning layer, which in finished caves was always carved away. To understand the magnitude of what was abandoned, you only need to walk to Cave 16. The Kailasa Temple, it's the staggering culmination of this technique, not a built structure, but a single, free-standing temple complex carved from top to bottom out of one hillside. A sculpture of a mountain made from a mountain. Archaeologists estimate that removing all the rock for Kailasa required the labor of thousands, working for generations. At Cave 29, the work stopped after perhaps only a third of that rock was removed. The sheer volume of labor saved by the halt is almost unimaginable. So why did the chisels fall silent here? The Rashtrakuta dynasty, which patronized Ellora, was a complex tapestry of religious support. While they're famed for the Hindu Kailasa, they also sponsored Buddhist and Jain caves. Sectarian shifts in royal favor could redirect artisans and resources overnight. A change of minister, the death of a key patron, a shift in theological focus, could leave a cave like 29, dedicated to the god Shiva, suddenly without funding. The work wasn't merely paused, it was categorically abandoned. The teams moved to other caves, and this vast chamber was left as a testament to interrupted devotion. This leads to a deeper reflection. What is the spiritual intention of carving a god's home from a mountain? It's an act of profound invitation. It says the divine is not somewhere else, but here, within the very substance of the world. The mountain itself becomes the deity's body. An unfinished cave temple, then, is a conversation cut short, an invitation drafted but never fully delivered. The silence in Cave 29 is heavy with that unresolved intention. It speaks to the fragility of even the most monumental visions, reminding us that these stone wonders were not inevitable. They were the fragile product of sustained will, wealth, and belief, any of which could vanish, leaving only a shadowy outline of what might have been. The silence in an Indian cave temple is one kind of stillness, but there's another kind in the highlands of northern Ethiopia. In the city of Axum, you have a field of giants. Slender stone spires over 70 feet tall, they stand sentinel. These are stelae, markers for royal tombs. They're smooth, with carved details that look like multi-story buildings. False doors, windows, they're serene, orderly, but to find where they began, you leave the city. You walk for miles into a dry, rocky valley called Göbekli. And there, lying in the dust, is a different kind of giant, a fallen obelisk of gray granite, but it's not just fallen, it's unfinished and it's colossal. About 108 feet long, if it had been raised, it would have dwarfed every other stele in Axum. It lies where it was shaped and where it broke. A solitary ambition in a silent landscape. This monument, they call it the Great Obelisk or Stele 4. It shows a sophisticated stoneworking tradition. The Axumite kingdom, at its peak around the 4th century, was a major power, trading with Rome, Persia, India. Their stelae are a unique architectural language. They look like abstract skyscrapers, but the technology to make them shares a global vocabulary. Like the Egyptians at Aswan, the Axumite quarry workers used trenches. They carved deep channels around a granite outcrop, Then, the evidence suggests they used thermal shock, building fires along the trench line to heat the stone, then dousing it with water. The sudden contraction would crack the granite along a clean plane, separating the monolith from the bedrock, but the Axumite signature is in the decoration. They didn't wait to carve. While the obelisk still lay prone, firmly supported by the earth, teams of sculptors began their work. Using iron chisels, they incised the elaborate facade. They carved rows of false doors, each with a carved latch. They etched horizontal bands representing the ends of wooden beams. These were symbolic details. A stone representation of the multi-story palaces the elite lived in. This was a house for the spirit. Every line had to be perfect, and doing it while the stone was stable was the only way to get that precision. The abandoned giant at Göbekli shows this process frozen. You can see the intricate patterns are complete along much of its length, but then the story changes. The base of the obelisk was never fully undercut. It's still partially attached to the living rock, and running across its width like a dark scar is a deep, catastrophic fracture. This is the key to the abandonment. The fracture likely happened during the final stages of separation, maybe as workers tried to lever the monolith free. Or more tragically, it may have cracked during the initial shaping. A hidden flaw in the granite, stressed by the constant hammering, finally gave way. To understand what they were trying to do, you look at the successfully raised Great Stele in Axum. It's a masterpiece of logistics. Archaeologists studying its base found evidence of a complex erection system. At the foot of the standing position, there's a massive pivot stone, a socket. The theory is compelling. The obelisk was dragged to its site on a sledge. Its base was carefully positioned over this socket. Then, using a system of ropes from the top of a high earthen ramp and levers at the base, crews began to pull. They raised the monolith inch by inch, pivoting it on that stone fulcrum until it was upright, then guiding it into a prepared foundation pit. It was a dance of physics and coordinated labor. The obelisk at Göbekli never got that chance. The fracture made it useless. The economic and symbolic loss would have been staggering. For the Axumite king who commissioned it, this was more than a failed construction project. In a society where these stelae were direct proclamations of power and divine favor, a broken giant was a public, permanent problem. Did it signal a loss of heavenly support? Was it seen as an omen? The workers would have downed their chisels. The master sculptor would have surveyed the crack with a sinking heart. The entire vast investment of labor and prestige was now a liability. This site, more than any other, is a pure lesson in material limits. It shows that ancient engineers, for all their skill, were always testing the boundary of what the stone could bear. They pushed monolithic architecture to its absolute edge, and here, at the very moment of creation, the stone itself said no. The giant in the Göbekli quarry is not a ruin. It's a captured moment of overreach, a testament to the courage to attempt the impossible and the humbling reality that sometimes the mountain wins. That solitary, fractured giant in Ethiopia, it speaks of a limit that was reached, but to find the origin of that impulse, you have to go back further. Much further, to a bare hill in southeastern Turkey, Göbekli Tepe. The ground is littered with flint. The earth is a pale, dusty gold, and rising out of it are these rings. Rings of massive T-shaped pillars made of limestone. Some are plain, others are covered in carvings, a riot of animals, foxes, snakes, scorpions, birds. This place rewrote history. It showed that complex monuments came first, before cities, before farming, before pottery. But to understand the people who built it, you don't look at the finished rings. You go to the edge of the site, to the quarry, and there, lying on its side, still part of the bedrock, is a different pillar. On its surface, coming out of the stone, is the form of a lion. Powerful, flowing, it's only half carved, the head is defined, the muzzle is clear. The body is there in deep relief, but the legs are just bumps. The mane has no detail. It's a creature caught in the act of being born from the rock. Over 11,000 years ago, a master carver stood here. He looked at this block of limestone and saw the lion inside. And then, for reasons we'll never know, he walked away. This single, abandoned pillar is maybe the most important teacher here. It shows a fundamental secret. The intricate carvings, the breathtaking ones, they weren't added later. Not after the pillars were raised. They were sculpted right here in the quarry. While the stone was still lying down, still attached to the earth, that changes everything. It means the whole artistic program, the symbolic world, was planned from the start. The pillars weren't blank canvases. They were conceived as complete, decorated entities before they ever moved. The technique itself is a marvel. They used flint tools. Sharp scrapers for the broad outlines, fine barons like stone needles for the deeper lines and details. They worked by pecking and grinding, persuading the limestone. On the half-finished lion, you can see the transition from rough outline to refined anatomy. The attention to muscle structure is already there, even in this early state. It was profound observation, profound skill. The next step after carving would have been undercutting. Using the same flint tools, workers would have separated the pillar from the living bedrock. Only then, as a finished sculpture, would it be ready for the journey. A journey of maybe a few hundred meters, but it would have taken many people, ropes, log rollers, levers. Not every pillar in the quarry has such elaborate art. Others nearby show only simple shapes, cup marks, rough beginnings. Archaeologists think this area had multiple purposes. A training ground for new artisans, a space to test designs, or maybe a ritual space itself. Some of these unfinished pillars, maybe including the lion, might have been left on purpose. As offerings, votive offerings to the quarry itself, acknowledging the sacred act of taking stone from the body of the earth. To see the culmination, you walk from the quarry to the main excavation. To enclosure D, there, pillar 18 stands in full majesty, a stylized human form in the shape of a T, arms bent, hands meeting over its waist, and covering its surface is a dense, swirling menagerie. A snarling predator, a duck in flight, a web of symbols. This is what the lion was meant to become. A pillar transformed into a tablet of belief, raised upright to form the architecture of the sacred. The contrast between the half-born lion and this completed sentinel, that's the whole story. It shows a workflow of astonishing sophistication, conception, artistry, engineering. All executed by people in a world we can barely comprehend. They invested generations in building these stone circles, and then, astoundingly, they buried them. Deliberately, filling the enclosures with thousands of tons of earth and rubble, preserving them for millennia. Why? What worldview explains that, creating something so monumental, so charged with meaning, only to put it in the ground? The half-carved lion offers no simple answers, but it holds the moment of decision. It captures the instant when the human mind first dared to impose a permanent vision. A vision of power and spirit onto the landscape. It's not a failure of construction, it's a frozen thought, a testament to the dawn of a new relationship. Between humanity, symbol, and stone, Muyuq Marka is this perfect circle, a foundation carved from giant stones. They're polygonal, interlocking, and the way they're cut, the curve is seamless. You stand in the center and just look up at the sky. This was the base for the central tower at Sacsayhuamon. It was meant to be a tall structure, but the construction stopped. It stopped so abruptly the stone itself feels like it's waiting, holding its breath. This circle shows the Inca architectural mind at its most meticulous. Planning for a future that got stolen, and the foundation isn't just a footprint, it's a machine made of stone. Each block is shaped with multiple angles. They lock together like a three-dimensional puzzle that creates a circle with incredible tensile strength. It can shift and settle without cracking. But the real genius is in the details you can't see. There are channels carved between the stones to direct rainwater away, and on the top course there are these socket holes. Perfectly aligned, they weren't for decoration. They were anchors for huge wooden beams, the vertical supports for upper floors that were never built. Everything was engineered in from the start, the drainage, the load-bearing points. The builders thought from the ground up. They had the finished tower visualized before they laid the first stone. You can see it in the wall's incline. The stones tilt inward as they rise. That's a technique called batter. It was a deliberate choice for earthquake resistance. Planned from the very beginning, the whole tower was designed to sway as one flexible unit during tremors, the kind that happen all the time in the Andes. So this foundation is a lesson in anticipation. Inca stability wasn't an accident. It wasn't just piling heavy rocks. It was a precise science, interlocking forms, calculated angles. All set in place before the building even started to go vertical. Spanish chroniclers saw similar towers. They left descriptions. They wrote about cylindrical buildings, 3 or 4 stories tall, with conical thatched roofs, interior floors connected by ladders, trapezoidal windows with views of the sacred valley. Muyuq Marka would have been the commanding heart of the fortress. For ceremony, for strategy, for observation, its completion would have been the final note, the triumphant note in the symphony of stone that is Sacsayhuaman. Then the siege of Cusco happened in the 1530s. That changed everything. It didn't just disrupt a construction site, it severed the continuity. The cultural and logistical continuity that made projects like this possible. The master masons, the organizers who understood the geometry, the communities that provided the labor. That whole network was shattered. Work on Muyuq Marka stopped, not for lack of skill, but because the world that sustained that skill was taken apart. So the foundation is more than unfinished architecture. It's a fossil of that moment of severance. What knowledge vanished when the last stones for the upper floors were never set? The specific rituals, the acoustic properties of the circular space, the full strategic advantage of its sightlines, that's all silent now. This ghostly blueprint reminds you. Conquest erases more than lives, it erases potential. It interrupts the logical conclusion of an engineering tradition, and it leaves you with a question mark. A question mark made of immaculate stone, a perfect beginning, and an enduring mystery about the magnificent end it was meant to support. Göbekli Tepe was a start. A different way of being in a place, but later, another civilization would try to get at that same feeling of monumentality, not with stone, though with fire. With liquid metal, there's a giant in the town of Barletta on the southern coast of Italy, a bronze statue of a Roman emperor, over 16 feet tall. He's holding a globe and a cross, but if you look at it, the story starts to come apart. The statue is a patchwork. The pieces don't fit together right. The right arm is attached in a crude way. The left leg is a different metal, a replacement from later. The details on the armor are blurry, unfinished. This isn't one complete thing. It's a puzzle, fragments from different times put together with different intentions. The Colossus of Barletta is probably a Roman emperor. Maybe Valentinian I or Marcian. It was cast in Constantinople in the 5th century, but it was never finished, not completely. It was cast in separate pieces, shipped, maybe lost in a shipwreck. Then salvaged centuries later, and medieval craftsmen put it back together. They'd forgotten how it was supposed to be done. You can see the end of a technology in those mismatched seams. To see what was lost, you have to imagine the foundry, the smoke, the noise. They used lost wax casting, but at a scale that was almost impossible. First, they'd make a full-size model out of clay. Then a layer of wax exactly the right thickness. then another clay shell packed around the wax. The whole thing went into a kiln. The wax melted out, leaving a hollow space. A perfect negative of the statue. Then the pour. For something this big, you needed multiple furnaces, all holding a heat above 1100 degrees Celsius. Tons of copper and tin mixed just right and perfect coordination. The molten metal had to flow into the mold from different points at the same time. To fill it evenly, any hesitation, a clog, a furnace cooling down, and it would fail. The Barletta statue shows they got that part right. The main torso was cast successfully. But large bronzes were never made in one piece. The arms, the head, the drapery, all cast separately. The final stage was assembly, welding. They used fusion welding, heating the edges of two bronze pieces until they were molten, fusing them together, adding more metal as a binder. On the Barletta Colossus, this stage went wrong. Or it was never done properly. The joins are weak. The right arm is in an awkward position. It suggests a hurried assembly, maybe by people who didn't have the original plans. And the surface, a new bronze statue isn't shiny, it's rough, covered in seams and vents that have to be filed away. Then the whole surface is polished. Abrasives to a mirror finish, maybe fire gilded after with gold and mercury. The Barletta statue has none of that. The details on the cloak are soft. The musculature is indistinct. The surface was never chased, never polished. It's a giant in its workshop clothes. The 5th century was upheaval. The Western Roman Empire was crumbling. Constantinople was more stable but still in constant crisis. An imperial workshop worked at the emperor's pleasure. A shift in policy, funding cut, metal diverted to weapons for a barbarian threat. Any of that could stop a project overnight. The statue was shipped in pieces, maybe to a western province for final assembly, and it arrived into a world that didn't have the skill to finish it. Or the ship went down, the pieces on the seafloor for centuries, corroding, forgotten, until fishermen dragged them up in the Middle Ages to see what it could have been. Look at the equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius in Rome. From a more stable time, it shows the full potential, the dynamic pose, the intricate face, the flawless join of horse and rider. It's a complete thought. The Barletta Colossus is a sentence interrupted. Its value now is in that incompleteness. Metallurgists study its alloy, its casting flaws, its repair techniques. It's a window into a high art technology that was about to vanish for 1,000 years. This giant, standing awkwardly in a square in Puglia, is a relic of a fading world. It whispers about furnaces that cooled for good, master craftsmen whose knowledge died with them, an imperial vision cast in bronze that never saw the light. The giant in Barletta is bronze, a technology fading away, but in Egypt there's another puzzle, a monument of physics and ambition that fell apart. It rises from the flat plain at Meidum. Not a smooth triangle, it's a strange, three-tiered tower sitting on a huge hill of rubble. From a distance, it looks like a medieval keep, something stranded in the wrong time. This is the Phantom Pyramid. It teaches a brutal lesson in gravity. What you see now is the inner core, the skeleton. The story is in the missing skin. Originally, this was a step pyramid, built for Pharaoh Huni. It had 7 or 8 levels, a stairway to the sky. Then his successor, Sneferu, decided to transform it. He told his engineers to fill in the steps, to cloak the jagged core in a smooth mantle of fine limestone. The goal was Egypt's first true, smooth-sided pyramid. A bold leap, and it failed catastrophically. You can stand at the base of that rubble mound and look up. The scene writes its own story. The small, rough core stones of the original step pyramid are still there. That central tower, but around it for hundreds of feet, is a chaotic sea of debris. Mixed in are larger, beautifully cut casing stones, the ones meant for the smooth facade. They didn't crumble, they slid. Modern engineers have a theory. The builders, eager for that perfect slope, built the outer casing too steep. Worse, they built this heavy mantle not on solid bedrock, but on unstable sand and gravel. A recipe written in stone, the collapse probably wasn't instant. It was likely a slow, groaning catastrophe. As the immense weight settled, the foundation shifted. The limestone blocks, lacking the grip of the stepped core, lost their purchase. The entire smooth skin sheared away, a colossal landslide of stone, rumbling down the sides to create that permanent apron of ruin. The sound must have been thunder, the dust cloud hanging for days. For the overseers watching, it was more than a setback, it was a divine rejection. A crack in the cosmic order. The site is an open-air laboratory. The stones tell the tale. The small, irregular core stones are the older, proven technology. The large, elegant casing stones in the rubble are the new, ambitious vision. Their separation is the result. The end of work is visible everywhere. No more casing stones were brought. No attempt to clear the rubble and start again. The site was abandoned. A kingdom's worth of labor and hope left as a warning. But this failure wasn't an end. It was the most important beginning. Sneferu, the father of the smooth pyramid, didn't give up. He learned. He took the engineers from Meidum and moved north to Dosha. There you see the direct result. His next project, the bent pyramid, starts at that same dangerously steep angle. But halfway up, the architects panicked. They changed the angle to a much shallower slope, creating the bent shape, a mid-construction correction, a direct reaction to the memory of sliding stone. And then, finally, they got it right. Sneferu's third attempt, the Red Pyramid at Dosha, is built at that same safe, shallow angle from the base. It stands complete. A flawless red limestone mountain, the first successful true pyramid in Egypt. So the strange tower at Meidum isn't a tomb. It's a prototype, a vital, failed prototype that cost an unimaginable effort. When you look at the pyramids at Giza, you're seeing a lineage that passed directly through this pile of rubble. It forces a quiet reflection, the human cost of such trial and error. The unnamed workers who moved those stones, only to see their work vanish in a slide of dust, and the resilience to look at that failure, understand it, and dare to try again with new knowledge. Meidum is the price of a revolution in stone, paid in full, left as a permanent lesson on the desert floor. The Basilica of Maxentius is in the Roman Forum. It's not a ruin exactly, it's more like an argument set in brick and concrete. It's a building of two minds. The Emperor Maxentius started it. He meant it as a monument to traditional Roman power, but then his rival, Constantine, seized it. Constantine finished it after a battle, after the Milvian Bridge in 312. You can stand inside it and see that argument. The scale is overwhelming. 3 huge vaults covered a space bigger than a football field. This was the Empire's Supreme Court. A machine of governance, and building it became a propaganda war, set in stone. The evidence is in the brickwork. On the northern aisle, the bricks are consistent. Orderly, that's Maxentius. His vision was conservative, looking back to earlier emperors like Trajan. He planned a traditional hall, a central nave with side aisles. The entrance was on the east, but then look at the opposite end. The bricks change, they get smaller, less uniform. The mortar joints are thicker. That's Constantine's builders. Working fast, Constantine didn't just finish it, he hijacked it. He reoriented the entire entrance to the south, facing the Via Sacra, so everyone would approach from his part of the city. He scrapped the apse Maxentius wanted on the west. He built a new one on the north, a more dramatic one, designed to hold a single feature, a colossal statue of himself. The statue was so large, its fragments are in the Capitoline museums now. A hand, a foot, the scale defies belief. Originally, the whole interior was to be sheathed in marble. You can see the small square holes in the brick. for the bronze clamps that held the marble slabs. Under Constantine, that lavish finish was mostly abandoned. The focus shifted to raw power. The statue became the only necessary decoration. The vaults show the rushed completion. The 3 barrel vaults are a masterpiece of concrete engineering. Their coffered ceilings lighten the weight, but the design of these vaults shifts. The coffer shapes the supports. They show adjustments made on the fly. By Constantine's engineers, they were working with a skeleton they didn't fully design, adapting it. Then there are the niches, everywhere, niches in the walls. Meant for statues of gods and emperors, they stand empty. That decorative program was never installed. The story became simpler. It was the story of one man's victory. To walk through this space is to walk through historical whiplash, a building that changed emperors mid-construction. It makes you wonder about the master architect. The one who served both masters, did he agree with the changes, or did he just follow orders, recalculating stresses for a new patron's whim? The materials tell a story of expediency. The shift in brick size suggests disrupted supply chains, then restarted under new management. The abandoned marble cladding speaks of redirected funds. A new priority where symbolic statement trumped aesthetic finish. This vast hall makes you consider public space, how it becomes a canvas for political narratives. Even unfinished, with its empty niches and bare brick, the Basilica shouted a message. It said the past could be overwritten, that a vanquished rival's monument could be remade into a trophy. Constantine understood architecture as a language. By repurposing Maxentius's greatest civic project, he didn't just erase his enemy. He conscripted his enemy's ambition into his own legend. The building's fractured form reveals something about monumental vision. It's never static, it's vulnerable, always vulnerable to the sudden currents of power. And sometimes the most revealing chapters are written in haste, where the grand plan is interrupted and a new one is stamped on top. The argument was about power. A story built in Roman brick and concrete, but there's another kind of selection. It feels less like politics, more like a quiet conversation with the earth. To find it, you leave the Mediterranean. You go to the Preseli Hills in Wales. The slopes are damp and green. The wind has a chill. The ground is thick with bracken and moss. And in the hillsides there are outcrops of a bluish stone. That's the source for the most famous stones on Earth. The smaller blue stones of Stonehenge came from here. Over 140 miles away, but recent archaeology at quarries like Khan Godog shows something. It's not just a source, it's a gallery of choices. A landscape where some stones were chosen, and their nearly identical neighbors were left behind forever. The mystery isn't the journey, though that journey is staggering. It's the selection. Why this pillar and not that one? At Khan Godog, the rock is a spotted dolerite. It has a crystalline texture, flecks of white feldspar that catch the light. Neolithic quarry workers over 5,000 years ago approached these natural pillars with skill. They didn't just break rock, they persuaded it. The quarry face shows the method. They would clear the soil and vegetation from a chosen pillar, one already partially separated by natural weathering. Then they used a combination of techniques. They might drive wooden wedges into fissures, soak the wood to make it swell, that created a controlled fracture, or they used thermal shock, building small, hot fires against the stone. Then dousing it with water from nearby springs. The sudden contraction would crack the stone along a clean plane, but the real sophistication is in the preparation. Archaeologists found that the workers built artificial platforms at the base of the pillars, stone and earth platforms. These weren't for standing on. They were loading bays. Once a pillar was loosened, it could be levered out, pivoting on stone fulcrums, lowered directly onto this prepared track. It was a system to minimize shock. To protect the stone from the very first moment of movement, the tool marks are still there, the pitting from stone mauls, the polished grooves from ropes. This was a deliberate, patient technology, and then they stopped, not at the end but in the middle. The quarries are littered with perfect pillars, fully extracted, lying on their prepared platforms, ready to go, but they never went. They were left in the Welsh hills. That forces a question: was the act of quarrying itself part of the ritual? Some archaeologists suggest the stones were not just building materials. They were perhaps considered animate, possessed of a spirit, a quality that made them suitable or unsuitable for the sacred task at Salisbury Plain. The selection may have involved divination, the sound a stone made when struck, the pattern of its spots, a dream or an omen. A pillar with a hidden crack, discovered only after it was freed, might be rejected. Seen as flawed, as unwilling, the dating adds another layer. Radiocarbon evidence suggests the extraction happened centuries before the stones were erected at Stonehenge. Maybe up to 500 years before. That changes the story. It means the blue stones were not quarried for a single known project. They were acquired and then kept, perhaps venerated in their own right, in Wales for generations. Their journey to Salisbury Plain may have been a later chapter, a very long biography. Follow the journey of a chosen stone, levered onto its platform, then onto a wooden sledge. Teams of people, maybe using oxen, hauling it down from the Preseli slopes. The route likely went south to the sea, to an estuary like Milford Haven. There, the multi-ton pillar would be loaded onto a raft or lashed between dugout canoes. A perilous coastal voyage, then up the River Avon, a final overland pull to the chalk plains. Every stage required not just muscle, but a sustained, communal belief in the stone's importance. So what determined a stone's fate? Practicality played a role: size, shape, structural soundness. But the silent pillars left on their loading bays suggest something more. They were physically perfect, yet spiritually incomplete. Perhaps they failed some unseen test. These Welsh quarries reveal that Stonehenge began not with architecture, but with theology. It began with a quiet, skilled act of choosing. The monument on Salisbury Plain is only the final act. Its prologue is written here, in the wet Welsh hills. In the stones that were told they could stay. The stones in Wales were told to stay, but there's another kind of monument, one that lived with a city for centuries, unfinished. In Germany, on the Rhine, there's the Cologne Cathedral. Its two spires reach up, perfectly Gothic, complete, but for most of its life it wasn't. It was famously unfinished. Its story goes 600 years, from the medieval world into the industrial age. So this idea of the interrupted monument, it didn't stop with the ancient world. They started building in 1248, plans on parchment. The goal was the largest Gothic cathedral in Northern Europe, a place for the bones of the three magi. Work went on for about 200 years in fits and starts. The choir was finished, consecrated by 1322, a stone forest of vaults and glass. A masterpiece. Then the momentum just stopped. The south tower only went up to the belfry. They put a temporary roof on it, and they left a huge wooden crane sitting on top of the stump. A medieval crane, and that crane stayed there. For 400 years, that crane was the city's skyline. This skeleton of stalled ambition, the reasons for stopping piled up. The Black Death came in the 1300s. It took people, it took money. Then the Reformation in the 1500s brought religious fights, new priorities. Then wars, economic changes. The cathedral was just a shell, the nave open to the sky, a huge fragment right in the middle of the city, and for the people living there, that's just how it was. Part of the landscape, their identity was tied to it not as a finished thing, but as something still in progress, a testament to what they once tried to do and what they were living with. That long pause left a record. When they started building again in the 1840s, driven by nationalism and new money, they had a challenge. They were finishing a medieval design with 19th century tools. You can see the jump in the stone. Look at the lower parts, the medieval choir. It's made from a local travertine. The work is a little irregular, hand tool marks. The upper parts, the nave and the spires, built in the 1800s, they used a harder sandstone from farther away. The joints are precise, cut by steam-powered saws. It's a subtle shift from craft to industry. Then there was the crane. That original wooden crane sat on the tower stump for over 400 years. A practical machine that became a monument itself. It was a promise that work would start again someday, and it did. They found the original 14th century plans in 2 different places. That gave them the blueprint. The 19th century architects, led by a man named Ernst Friedrich Zwirner, they wanted to finish it faithfully to the medieval design, not with new styles. That created a conversation across time. The old plans called for flying buttresses of a specific shape. The new engineers, with better knowledge of forces and iron for reinforcement, could build that same shape even stronger. They used steam cranes, railways to bring stone, iron hidden inside the masonry. They finished what the medieval masons began, but with the fingerprints of the Industrial Revolution all over it. So what's it mean for a city to live with an unfinished symbol of its faith for centuries? This wasn't a forgotten ruin. It was active. Services happened in the finished choir while the wind blew through the open nave. It was a constant reminder of aspiration, of a project bigger than any one lifetime. Finishing it in 1880, after over 600 years, it wasn't just about completing a building. It was about closing a wound, connecting the modern city back to its medieval soul. Cologne shows something that unfinished isn't always the end. Sometimes it's a pause. A breath held across generations. A monument can carry the hopes and the tools of many different eras. Its stones are a conversation between centuries. This cathedral's path from fragment to icon, it tells us that human ambition is a story often written by many hands, with long, quiet chapters in between. Where the only sound is the wind through an empty nave, waiting for the next builder to come. These silent quarries and half-built towers, they're not failures. They're classrooms frozen in time, each one from that cracked obelisk in Egypt to the abandoned pillar in Turkey, holds a piece of a universal truth. Ancient construction was never a magic trick. It was a precarious, human-scale endeavor, and these sites let us see the scaffolding before the final illusion was complete. They show us a set of shared principles that spanned continents and millennia, principles we can only glimpse in a finished monument. The first universal lesson is planning from the inside out. Whether it was the Inca shaping a block in the quarry to fit a specific wall miles away, or the sculptors at Göbekli Tepe carving a lion into a pillar before it was ever moved, the most critical work happened at the source. This quarry-first logic was about control. It was about minimizing risk. The Olmecs roughed out their colossal heads near the basalt source to make them portable. The Romans prefabricated identical archstones so they could be assembled by workers who might never see the master plan. It was a strategy of breaking the impossible into manageable, repeatable steps. Far from the pressure of the sacred site, then came the battle with physics, transportation. The abandoned megalith at Baalbek and the ready bluestones in Wales, they shout the same truth. Moving multi-ton stone was the single greatest logistical hurdle. It demanded an understanding of friction, leverage, and mass coordination that we are still deciphering. The earthen ramps at Didyma, the pivot stones in Axum, the log rollers in the Andes, these were not incidental. They were engineered systems. A finished pyramid hides its ramps. A standing obelisk erases its sledges. But at these frozen sites, the infrastructure of movement is still implied. It's lying in the tools left behind and the pathways leading nowhere. The third principle is the social engine behind the stone. A project like the Cologne Cathedral, stalled for centuries, shows that will and wealth are fragile. The ziggurat abandoned after an invasion, the pyramid halted by a king's death, the Buddhist colossus paused by shifting patronage. They all testify that monumental building required a perfect and sustained alignment. It needed political stability, it needed economic surplus, and it needed a shared cultural vision powerful enough to coordinate thousands of lives for generations. When any part of that alignment broke, the chisels fell silent. These sites are barometers of their society's health. Perhaps the most humbling thread is the acceptance of trial and error. The collapsed pyramid at Meidum is not an anomaly. It's the necessary prototype for the smooth pyramids at Giza. The bent pyramid at Dosha is a mid-course correction, literally set in stone. The Romans at Baracale left a surplus of perfect blocks, revealing a system so efficient it could overproduce. These aren't tales of incompetence, but of learning. They dismantle the modern myth of ancient perfection. They replace it with something more relatable, a process of daring, failure, adaptation, and hard-won success. So imagine the ultimate ancient construction site, combining all these lessons. It begins in a quarry where masons listen to the stone. They use fire, water, and patiently swung hammerstones to persuade a pillar free. That pillar is carved and decorated right there, its destiny already shaped. It's moved via a prepared road on rollers, with hundreds hauling in unison to the rhythm of a drum. At the sacred site, it's lifted by a crane powered by a human treadmill, guided into a space prepared for it alone. And all of this happens under the watch of a priesthood and a king. Funded by a thriving trade network, believed in by a community, this perfect site never existed in one place, but its components are real. We've seen them scattered across 20 time capsules. The next time you look at a photograph of the Great Pyramid or walk through the ruins of a Roman forum, try to see past the finished form. See the Aswan quarry with its fractured dream. See the sledges groaning on a makeshift ramp. See the workers' village, the grain stores, the water carriers. See the political intrigue that could stop it all tomorrow. These frozen sites give us that vision. They transform awe into understanding. They remind us that history's greatest wonders were not delivered from on high. They were built from the ground up by human hands, one precarious, ingenious step at a time. The journey ends here, but the lesson stays. From the quarries in Egypt to the hills in Wales, these 20 silent places have spoken. They tell us history isn't a gallery of finished trophies. It's a workshop, a place of ambition and ingenuity and setback and sometimes quiet surrender. Every chisel mark left in a hurry, every block left in a quarry tells a more human story than any polished wall. These aren't ruins, not in the usual way. They're open-air classrooms. Their lesson plan is written in cracked granite, in half-carved stone. They offer lessons you can't get anywhere else. In engineering, you see the trial and error behind every success. In sociology, the sudden quiet of a worksite maps the collapse of an empire or a shift in faith. In art, a faint outline on a cliff shows you the vision that came before the first hammer strike. They teach humility, the broken obelisk at Aswan, the fallen pyramid at Meidum, the giant Buddha still in the rock. They show that even the greatest civilizations pushed against limits. Against the strength of stone, against a human lifetime, against politics and belief, their unfinished state is proof of that struggle. It strips away the myth of inevitability. It shows the monuments we see today were never guaranteed. They were victories, hard-won and precarious, and yet they inspire awe, not for what was, but for what was attempted. The audacity to quarry a 1,000-ton block at Baalbek, the coordinated faith to outline a colossus into a mountain in Sichuan, the patient genius to shape a stone puzzle in the Andes, knowing each piece had only one place. These frozen moments capture human ambition suspended. They let us witness the courage to begin something that might outlast the world that conceived it. So next time you see a perfect pyramid or walk through a great cathedral, look closer, remember the unseen trials, the hidden methods, the quarries full of ready stones. The hillsides holding rejected pillars, remember the unfinished versions, the alternate histories that never were. They are the key, they show the true story. The messy, brilliant human story behind the glory.